Do believe the clock on the wall is reasonably accurate, because the selectmen live by it. So it's 4:30. This is the Water Quality Management Committee. We meet for 2 hours every other Wednesday generally. Sometimes we skip, sometimes we don't, but we have an agenda tonight. I think several of you have it. And we're gonna just dive right into it. Unless people want to adjourn now and go over for 2 weeks. But the first item on here is under a sort of a rubric that says, vote yes for the Article 15 campaign. And this is just much like what we did last time, guys, that town meeting members need to be encouraged to ask questions or get more information.
Tell them we know where they live.
So, I am not the great Karnak, I can't do this, but I'm gonna start with Jonathan at this end.
Oh,
You get to pick one and only one. All right? And what this is this is a list of town meeting members that's been divvied up into 7 different groupings.
I'm gonna use John's. I'm gonna,
And Kristen will keep track of who's got which one or whatever.
I'd rather have my own
And
precinct.
Waterbury's gonna get the default
I'd
one.
rather have my own precinct.
I know, me too.
What's the point of being randomized?
So there's 2 things in there. One is a list by, I did 7 groupings. So these are town meeting members that, I encourage you to contact, either through email or by phone or any way that you want. Let them know that this committee supports Article 15.
I got some easy ones.
Amy's putting together a little bit of a fact sheet. If there was a presentation at the meeting that I missed on this project, and I think you can use that if you want to talk to people or have questions on it. The other piece of paper that's in there is a listing of when the precinct meetings are. I've been told by Amy that she's covering the bulk of them. One of them is going to be covered by either Peter McConaty or the town's assistant manager. But I encourage you, if you're in a precinct or have an interest or whatever, and can make one of the precinct meetings just to be there to answer questions or fill things in. And it is town government at its best. It's, so
Are you gonna coordinate to make sure that there's at least one person at each meeting?
there is, this committee doesn't have to have a person at each meeting. You're free to choose any meeting you want to go to. Amy's going to cover, I always forget, it's 9 precincts. Amy's covering
Everything except for March 27th.
everything except for the precinct 8 and 9. And I have it on my calendar, and Peter Johnson Staub has it on his, and Peter McCartney has it on his, so I think we're covered, but again, always good to talk to people that have the power of the vote, to make sure that we get to where we get to.
And what's the blue ink mean? What does the blue ink mean? Does
It means,
people have 2 votes?
it means that Michael Palmer, at the town, so if anybody else is curious, you can go to the town clerk's webpage and you can download the Excel spreadsheet of all the town meeting members. I'm having to get to this, Steve, to answer your question.
I think it just means there's a hyperlink.
I think it's just the way it goes in and whether or not the computer grabs it as a valid email address that already knows and shows it as an email address or not. I don't think there's any, there's no secondary, tertiary, or quadriary meaning to that, all right?
Got it.
If you forward the email, it's probably a live link to send them a message.
Yeah,
It wasn't on paper.
yeah. And there's also a thing at the top that says email addresses are supplied voluntary and may not be updated. So I don't know whether he's got some thing in there where the ones that he knows are valid come up blue and the other ones are
People in our precinct?
not, I don't know.
no, these are all businesses.
No, I'm saying for 4, when I have, just talk to the heads.
It's a homework assignment, it's like a science project, there'll be a fair. We expect to have a noted panel of judges on your performance. All right. The second item on the agenda is the status of marine borings.
You promised I could speak on this, first
But by all means, if anybody wants to comment on us reaching out to people on Article 15, don't go too far off topic, though.
No, I'm not going off topic. I actually want to give you this for the permanent file, for the minutes. I've submitted to you a list of 28 questions that I feel are very important, that the average resident of Falmouth or residents that are affected by this section of sewering would be very interested in knowing. You know, I'm actually asking the Water Quality Management Committee, the wastewater superintendent, and also the boards, the select board. So you are advisory committee to the select board, so I would hope that you would forward those questions to the select board. This next phase of sewer, I don't feel was publicized enough. And the homeowners in this town don't know the astronomical cost involved with this section of sewering. I've been talking to Mass DEP, State Revolving Fund Manager, and others to get some real questions, get some real answers to these questions. You know, in our last meeting, the betterment was listed in Amy's presentation at $40,000 betterment. I also looked up a Cape Cod Chronicle article from Chatham Sewer, and they actually listed from their Board of Selectmen's meeting the actual costs in Chatham as of January 31st, 2024. So we know we have a $40,000 cost of betterment that might go up and might go down. I feel like it should be more concreted. There should have been a discussion with all the residents in town. This shouldn't be discussed on town meeting floor. So everyone, especially the residents in that affected area, could speak. So let me share some numbers from Chatham's hookup. So a 30-gallon grinder pump, the hookup cost with a 30-gallon grinder pump, just the pump is $10,000. Chatham's Board of Selectmen decided to give a discounted replacement cost of $6,000 when they need to be replaced. Now, the total cost to hook up the connection with a grinder pump is between $16,000 and $25,000 on top of the betterment. Now, the reason that number varies from $16,000 to $25,000 is depending on the electrical service for that particular property. Older homes that don't have enough capacity for a 220 electric grinder pump hookup would be forced to upgrade their service to a larger service for that additional capacity. That additional cost would be the $8,000 to $10,000 that push that hookup fee up. Now if you take these numbers and you put it in consideration, you're looking at $56,000 to $65,000 cost to homeowners, single-family residents. Now, I know there's gonna be, zero-interest loans and stuff, but for some of these homeowners that get by paycheck to paycheck, and our retirees that are on a fixed income, this is an astronomical number. And then we're going to town meeting, and we're asking for $60,000. Now, I talked to Michelle Krugen from the State Revolving Fund. She was very interesting. We had a great conversation, and she told me the town of Falmouth can borrow $50,000 under the State Revolving Fund. The other $10 million has to be borrowed under regular borrowing, maybe 4 or 5% interest rate. But we can't go back like we have previously for that additional money the following year. And we have to apply every year. So if this project gets held up with the Buzzards Bay Coalition, that means we have to go back to State Revolving Fund the following year and reapply. And then if it gets held up again, we have to reapply again for that 50, hopefully they keep the cap at $50 million. So other costs that I am aware of is nowhere in the.
Matt, I'm gonna interrupt you for 1 second. So this article's on here to talk about.
It's talking
Going
about
to the
Article
top.
15, right?
Yeah, but you're running down a long list of finances for which I'm not sure your numbers are completely correct. So how long is your presentation gonna be?
I have a couple more minutes, and I don't know the cost of these, but
Okay.
these are questions I put in that list. Not many people in the town of Falmouth have realized that the town of Falmouth entered into an agreement with the Buzzards Bay Coalition for what they call a nitrogen offset plan. That nitrogen offset plan means the town of Falmouth is giving the Buzzards Bay Coalition money to give a stipend to homeowners in West Falmouth to offset, it's a discount to put IA septic systems in. I already talked to Corin Peterson, and she said they're gonna ask for the same thing for North Falmouth. So now, we have our sewer costs. Who's paying for these nitrogen offset plans? You know, and, you know, we're gonna see a presentation on the permeable reactive barrier. This discharge from the wastewater treatment facility is making the West Falmouth watershed a nitrogen-sensitive area. We're putting this permeable reactive barrier in to block that. You know, that's an additional cost to sewering in the town of Falmouth. These are hidden costs. These are costs that haven't been calculated. So, you know, I'm just trying to inform the public and ask questions that need to be asked, so we're not getting caught off guard down the road. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the audience wish to speak to Article 15?
I'll just speak briefly.
Thank you.
Hi, Doug Brown, Select Board. So we don't know exactly what the Select Board is gonna make for final determination once the engineering numbers are in. We might choose to back out the cost of the lift stations. There might be other considerations that come into play. 40,000 is an honest estimate of what it costs to do the job. So there's other variables that can come into play. And as far as the location of the lift stations, one's in Falmouthport and one's on the Augusta property. The Augusta property with 400 foot of frontage should be somewhere we can find a place that will be amenable to the neighbors, I would hope. So I just think there's maybe a little more concern about those particular items. Certainly the cost is a very real concern, but we'll try to see what we can do to minimize that, if anything. Hopefully it can be.
I will point out that, you know, this isn't the first time this project's been talked about. I mean, we've gone before the T-Ticket Association, we've been before the selectmen. We've told everybody. Matt, you have put onto the social media that the town is somehow or other obligated to hold public meetings and inform people. I spent some time today going back through chapter 83 and the 40 somewhat sections of chapter 43, which relate to sewers and the construction of sewers and the development and preparation of betterments. I do believe the town's been not holding back. Your implication in your social media posts that we are somehow or other not being clear and not explaining what's going on is a little bit of an overstatement on your part. You know, we've not hidden this project from anybody. We've been very clear on it. We've talked about the Augusta parcel use more than once. There are additional steps to go to get any building or structure permitted through the ZBA or the planning board. And we will, I believe the town will follow those steps, so, you know, you're usually pretty good about knowing what you're talking about, but some of the things you've been putting out there lately are bordering on hyperbole and are not factually based.
May I speak to that?
You
I'll
can say
keep it
whatever you
brief.
want.
You know, there's a right of a butter law in the state of Massachusetts.
Can you
If-
quote-
if
can you
any-
quote-
any
can you quote the
project-
general- Can you quote the general law?
I'm not an attorney, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, you should tell me what it is, because I spent time today researching where what we've done to date is not in compliance with the Massachusetts general laws.
So,
We're gonna have another point, when we
you
go to
let
the
me-
ZBA and the planning board, okay? With
Steve.
complete plans.
I let you speak, I'm speaking now. So, it's any project, you have to notify your abutters. And you have to have a notified meeting, you have to put plans on record, and let me finish.
You go ahead,
And those
finish.
abutters have the right to review those plans, to know the impact on their property. And so the town of Falmouth feels that they can skirt around regulations that everyone else in
They
town
don't.
has to
No, they
fall
don't.
by.
No, they
And you
don't.
know what? The wind turbines thought the same thing. And $20 million
And the wind
later,
wind turbines lost in court. Listen, the Mass General Law says that communities can lay out sewers. There's nothing in that that talks about having to notify abutters because sewers are gonna go in the road. Mass General Law is very clear on betterments. There's no requirement in Mass General Law, Chapter 83, to notify abutters. There is a requirement for structures, when you go to the planning board or the ZBA, to notify abutters. For you to say that there's been a requirement to do all this, and we have not, you imply that we've intentionally not done this. We're not at the point where we have a plan to put in front of the ZBA or the planning board. So I do take exception to you making a statement over and over about all these people having to be notified. We've publicized this, we've discussed it, we've presented it at town meeting, and to imply that we have not done due diligence because of some belief you have where you can't tell me what the basis for your belief is. Quote me the law, and I will go look it up and see if we're
I'm
wrong.
glad to discuss it with you off, another time, Steve. But
Well,
you're- but-
you put things in the social media in a public forum, and you've stated them as facts, and I don't believe they're facts. I'm sorry if I seem pissed, but I like to believe in the truth and doing things correctly.
Steve, that grinder pump is town infrastructure. You're putting that on people's property. You don't think they have a right to know what's being put on their property? That lift station is municipal structure. You don't think the neighbors around that lift station, that raw sewage pumping station, have the right to have a meeting before this goes to funding? It's pretty sad that Saxton property was better about their neighbors than the town of Falmouth has been. And that discussion came out very positive. The plan from the Saxton project from the beginning.
We're not
and the
talking the
finish-
Saxon project.
And
We're
in
not
the
talking the
end,
Saxon
were
project.
greatly different because of the public comment.
Yeah. And you know where the public comment came from? When did that occur? It occurred when they went before the ZBA.
Right,
That,
which was
which is the
required.
forum for where it happens. So for your implication that because we haven't gone to the ZBA with this structure yet, that we are somehow or other remiss, is a misstatement. We will go before the proper boards for these structures, and there will be public hearings as required by law.
The design of that structure and the number of grinder pumps in this system is gonna greatly change the number that's borrowed at town meeting. And that's why I've been asking for it. Because town meeting is going to borrow $60 million worth of funding. And if that structure has to go 1,000 feet back on the Augusta parcel, that's $400,000.
So Matt, what you're suggesting is that we do not go forward to do anything to clean up the things because of your criteria, because of your desires, and because of your needs, rather than following the law.
isn't about me,
Following the regulations. You want
This is
to
about
put your own
transparency.
regulations onto us. We're not gonna do it.
Exactly. You're not gonna do it.
No, we're gonna do it when it's the proper time to do it. And if we have to move the pump station back 1,000 feet for some reason, we will move the pump station back 1,000 feet.
And get additional funding.
I doubt we have to get additional funding if we move by 1,000 feet.
I'm just saying, I'm not gonna argue with you, Steve.
Amy?
Just briefly on this, it is a site plan review through the planning board that will happen after town meeting. And we've been planning to go through this process. That is, we will be doing that. And I do not expect to be moving the lift station back 1,000 feet.
Anybody else in the audience care to comment? Malcolm, you need to step up to the microphone.
Malcolm Donald, West Falmouth, town meeting member. It just seems like you have the cart before the horse. You're asking for the money, and then you're gonna have the public hearings and notify the abutters. Well, the abutters have a big piece in this. They're paying for it. And to do that, to have all the money and then go out, oh, by the way, this is what we're gonna do. I mean,
Okay.
what do the abutters have to say about it?
So, there are 2 lift stations that would require public notification to abutters, right? One of them is in Falmouth Port. We've had ongoing negotiations with the Falmouth Port Association. They, in fact, much like what happened on Spring Bars Road, they've granted a parcel of their land for an easement. They've been completely notified and engaged in it. Does anybody have any sense of how many abutters there are to the Augusta parcel?
What,
Does anybody have any sense? There's the huge parcel goes around. There might be 5 abutters. One of them is Falmouth Lumber.
I'm talking about the 820 home parcels that are gonna be affected by the sewer.
Yeah.
And those 820 households are gonna have to pay the, what is it, the $53,000, and they're not gonna find this out until,
I would be surprised if anybody who's in the service area at this point is unaware of the project, because we've been reaching out to them. We went to the TTIC Association and made a presentation with them. We've made presentations in front of town meeting in the past and in front of the Board of Selectmen, and we've discussed it numerous times at this board, okay?
all right,
So
well,
there is no legal obligation to
Well, I-
notify everybody who's gonna abut a project in this town. If the town comes into it, repave a road, right, it affects the abutters. Should the town be notifying every abutter when they repave a road, that they're gonna repave the road?
there's no exposure to the people abutting the road. It's actually gonna improve their property. But just because there's no legal requirement, there's a moral requirement to notify the 820 people that are gonna be in that affected by the sewer. And there's a lot of those people are, it's just a second home for them, so they're not gonna go to the T-Ticket Association or,
But if we posted a public notice that there's gonna be a public meeting at the Lawrence School to discuss the TASA Phase 1 project, these second homeowners are gonna see that notice in the enterprise and show up?
they're not gonna see the notice.
So what should we be doing? Should we be calling them on the phone? Should we be sending them a personal letter? Should we get them a bus?
I
What should
think-
we do to get these people
I think you
here?
ought to send them a return receipt registered letter saying that we're gonna be, we're voting on April 7th for monies for a sewer, and that sewer's going into your neighborhood, and you're gonna be on the line for $43,000. And then they ought to know that. They ought to know what's coming down. I think it's grossly unfair that, yeah.
I have my opinion, you have yours. Amy?
I wanted to speak briefly about the betterment process, and that does involve hearings. And I think there's a little misunderstanding about how things have been done before and how they'll be done this time. For example, the Little Pond Sewer Project, the last town project, the funds were appropriated in 2014, and the public hearings about betterments, or the public hearing about the betterment was in 2015. There are two main select board meetings that will happen after the vote that are related to the betterment. One is related to the betterment policy about how SEUs, sewer equivalent units, will be assigned to different properties, and the other is the hearing where the betterment is, the order of betterment assessment is voted. So that is in order to charge the betterment, you are required to have a public hearing and notify all the abutters in writing, and that will happen. Those things happened more than a year after the appropriation for the Little Pond project, and they will be happening sooner for this project. They will be happening between now and the fall because of the timing of this project relative to the construction appropriation. So it happened afterwards last time, it's gonna happen afterwards this time, but it will happen, and it's going to be done in accordance with the requirements.
Other comments? Otherwise, we're gonna move on to the next agenda item. Okay. John Kaufman is going to provide us an update on the marine borings. I hope all those who are in attendance here and all the people that are watching online have had a chance to see the barge off of Kite Park. Give you a good indication of where you'd like to put an outfall.
All right, so the drilling is still ongoing.
And there's a figure up here that shows a map on the left. The stars represent the marine borings that have been drilled to date. Again, these are 100-foot holes that are going down about 5 inches in diameter, collecting samples every 5 feet or so for rock properties test to help design the pipe and make sure that the hole is going to be of sufficient quality for the pipe, and also to see if there's any unwanted boulders in the way, because once you encounter a boulder with your well bore, that causes lots of delays, and delays equal more money, and nobody wants to see more money being spent than what's budgeted. The good news is so far, as predicted by the basic geology of Cape Cod, and especially in Falmouth, we're not encountering any large rocks. The biggest rocks we're seeing are sort of pebble size, and you can see on this core here, the scale is in inches on the right. You're seeing some gravel, sort of less than half, quarter-inch type pieces of rock. No issues for drilling, and that's pretty uncommon. The more common type of sediment that we're encountering in the boreholes are these brown and light gray, fine to medium, occasionally coarse-grained sands. Kind of what you would predict in this sort of geologic setting. Most of Falmouth has been deposited through the actions of glaciers. And our location for this well bore and for the horizontal drill that's going to happen to emplace the outfall pipe is situated not only in a good position for the mixing and the currents to cause the dilution and also beyond the eelgrass, but geologically it's in a place where we don't expect boulders and we're not finding them. So that's good news all around. They still have, they're on borehole 6 now. They should finish that maybe tomorrow. They're going to move off to the final offshore borehole number 7 sometime Friday into Saturday, maybe Sunday, complete that. The barge will actually leave, go to New Bedford, and then the truck-mounted drill will come back and drill the onshore location at B1, and probably by the March 28th or so, they should be done that week. So there's not much more work to go on there. I just want to take a second to kind of put all this in perspective. My background's in geology, so for me it's second nature, but for people who are not used to it, what I've done is superimposed Falmouth today on what the geology looked like 21,000 years ago when we were partially covered by glaciers. And you can see the figure on the left side shows the Buzzards Bay moraine. There's actually a lobe of ice called the Buzzards Bay lobe that came down, reached maximum distance from the north about 23,000 years ago, then started melting back at about 21,000 years ago. It's in the position where it deposited the Buzzards Bay moraine. Moraines are the problems because they have a sort of a chaotic mixture of coarse boulders, large boulders, gravel, sand, mud. It's just a dog's breakfast of sediments, and that's because they're distributed by the ice. The ice acts as a conveyor belt. It brings whatever is eroded by the glaciers, it drops them at the moraine. At that point, moving water takes over and deposits the, what I'll call the outwash plain. And in Falmouth, we have what's called the Crooked Pond deposits and the Mashpee Pitted Plain. And basically, as you go from the left to the right, the sediments get smaller, finer grained, and the fine sediment ultimately, because of its light nature, gets carried out by the waters into what existed to the sort of southeast, we call Glacial Lake Nantucket, and the fine-grained muds were deposited there for the most part. So what we're seeing in the outfall pipe, and I kind of put the borings in roughly their geologic position. I've got the barge showing number 7. They should be there on a few days. And then the sediments that are shown on the top, the cores, that's what we're finding. It's going as predicted. So in this case, the geology is matching what we hope to see, and this should ultimately result in drilling the HDD pipe to bring the outfall out into the sound in a relatively easy fashion. So hopefully that lets you see kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we looked like 21,000 years ago when the glaciers were knocking at our doorstep. So I remember. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board?
You haven't aged a bit, 21,000.
When will they be done, do you think? If they get on the 28th of March, I think it's Wednesday, and start drilling the onshore pipe, I would imagine by Friday they're completed. So I'm thinking by the end of next week. So.
But they've been working their way inland from.
Well, they've been working out into deeper water, and then they're going to take the boat out and dock it, and then drive the truck-mounted rig back on shore. Now, it's all weather dependent. When we had the big rain on Monday, I believe, there was no work being done. If we have more days like today, then they can do a much more efficient job, so. But we had dinner with the GHD geotechnician, who's actually on the barge now working the samples and describing the samples, and he was giving us an update. So we're hoping by the end of next week, the job will be done. Now, there'll be laboratory tests that continue on with the samples collected. I imagine that's several months of work before they actually issue the report.
Steve?
Why don't they, I know there's a good reason for this, I just don't know what it is. Why don't they have to do borings all the way from Kite Park up to the sewage treatment plant? Is it so shallow that they know what the,
We will do borings. That's a separate program.
Oh.
That'll be a separate program when we design the pipe. But one of the reasons to do this, these marine borings right now, is the technical effort to directionally drill this distance. And the cost for doing that is highly dependent upon what soils you have out there. Okay, more so than digging up 6 or 7 feet deep in a street. And so, in order to know whether or not the outfall at the Kite Park location was a valid selection to go to, and that we'd have a reasonable cost to put that pipe in, we needed the marine borings. If these, I've joked that I'm gonna do the happy dance when we find that we have the predicted soils. You know, if we've been encountering, for whatever reason, as he's got that up there, if stuff having to do with the Buzzards Bay moraine had, you know, slid over a little bit to where Kite Park area, where we're hitting boulders and rocks and everything else, we'd have to rethink how to do this.
And the path of these borings is within 2 or 3 feet of where they're actually gonna drill?
Oh, yeah.
They were cited very specifically to match the trajectory of the HDDE pipe that will be drilled.
Yep.
I wouldn't say within 2 or 3 feet.
Well, the reason I asked that is when we had that site visit a couple weeks ago to the Mill Road site, which was fascinating, by the way, they pointed out that 10 years ago, when they drilled horizontally out the same way, it took them weeks because they were running into lots of rocks.
Yeah.
But 20 feet away this year, they did it in 2 days because it was sand.
Yeah,
Jonathan's got the answer.
I sent you a note on the reason geologically. They're a mile closer to the moraine than the Kite Park location.
Right, but the difference occurred in
That's-
20
that's-
feet.
You're gonna predict statistically more heterogeneity in terms of encountering boulders or not as you get closer to the moraine. So when you look at this image of a glacier, a modern glacier, the closer you are to the moraine, the front, the more likelihood you're gonna see boulders in the path. It doesn't mean every wellbore is gonna intersect it, and it's just luck at that point because you're not doing anything to pre-site where you think there might be boulders. They got lucky. But as you go further away, the probability of encountering those big boulders drops off dramatically. And what we're seeing here is we're finding mostly sand. As you go deeper down, maybe a little bit of silt, but we're not seeing anything coarser than pebble size. And that's exactly what you predict if you're in this outwash deposit away from the moraine. So the geology is behaving as predicted.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to the, I'm not sure what Eversource did, but oftentimes on these type of directional drilling projects, people take borings at like 1,000 feet. And we're taking them at 500. It's a little bit of cost at this stage here, but it reduces the risk and increases the likelihood that we're gonna see consistent soils all the way out.
You're talking about the interval between borings.
Interval between borings is 500, not 1,000.
It seems to me the greater knowledge comes from John's education than from the borings. But they're both pointing in the same direction
You
here.
want hard data points.
Go ahead, Ed.
Just reinforcing that, at some point, I don't think they have yet, but Eversource has agreed they would share boring information from the 2014 project and the project they are just completed at Mill Road. And nicely, they have now staged at the Surf Drive paid parking lot, and they are gonna do another boring out towards Oak Bluffs. Not quite as deep, I think it was 55 feet versus 85 that they are at Mill Road, but they're gonna be doing the same thing, again, closer to where the Kite Park project is proposed. And that's gonna give us a raft of knowledge to either disprove or reinforce, most likely, what we have found with the test borings thus far. Correct statement, Jonathan? That's
Yeah.
gonna be a great thing to see, and they expect to start probably within the week, again, weather dependent. But they'll be out there for weeks, doing the same pilot bore and then the reaming out for the larger 18-inch pipe.
About a year ago, before I was even a member of the committee here, just a citizen, I did a report that circulated to some of you guys where I synthesized all the data that's out there from, public utilities, USGS, all the coring, all the seismic data to kind of come up with a model that led to the prediction of what I expected to see before they started drawing out here. And that's available through, I don't know, Steve has it or somebody, but this will be another data point. Every time you get a new data point, you revise the model, right? So it'd be great to see that data when it comes.
Good. The woman with the green sweater right behind Amy, did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I'm coming late to the game.
That's okay, step up to the microphone and introduce yourself, that's all. Thank you.
My name is Pat Zimmerman, and I was just wondering.
We like having you get in the game, even if you show up late.
What is this about? Is this connected with the project that we're doing across to the vineyard? Or, what are these borings about? What is
So
this project?
currently, the town of Falmouth's wastewater plant has groundwater discharge to some sand beds that go into the ground. As the town wants to expand the area to be sewered, finding a location to go into the ground was becoming very problematic for a lot of reasons. So we started looking at, should we put an ocean outfall in, which is a few thousand feet off of Kite Park, rather than putting it onto the ground. And so this is that project to design and permit this outfall.
Okay, thank you.
I was reminded to introduce myself. Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. Just in follow-up to that, part of the confusion is there are two different projects going on offshore right now, and there's been discussion of both of them. So the presentation was about the soil borings that are being conducted to collect data for design of the outfall, the town's treated wastewater outfall. The other project that's going on at the same time that Ed was referring to is the Eversource, not the town, is drilling additional conduit out to Martha's Vineyard. And so they were first at Mill Road, and then they're gonna be at Surf Drive. Separate project, not a town project.
Got it.
Anybody else want to comment on borings, glacial outwash?
Thanks for the thorough report.
Wasn't the least bit boring.
I like that dog
So, Ken, I think you're up next.
Okay.
Very quickly, the town, a while back, looked at the potential for putting a permeable reactive barrier for Snug Harbor, which is the backside of West Falmouth Harbor. And we submitted a grant application, and we've been invited to.
Stealing my thunder.
Oh, okay, sorry, but I figured you were gonna get it more specific. We've been invited to go to the next level.
Right.
We don't have the grant yet, but they liked it.
Responded with a letter of inquiry to the National Estuaries Project, I think requesting a total of, what,
450-ish?
450,000 or so to fund a permeable reactive barrier. And so what I wanted to do is kind of go over the siting a little bit and, what we're thinking. So we know a lot about West Falmouth Harbor, thanks to both the town wells that have been out there since, what, 2000? Yeah, in the early 80s, so all those little red dots. And then in 2005 or so, at the Marine Biological Lab, we got some funding to study West Falmouth Harbor, and we put in a series of shore wells, which are shown by these little yellow triangles. And so we can use the water table heights that you measure in those wells to actually put contour lines rather than just rely on USGS regional model for how groundwater flows, see what is the water table like, and these pink lines show the direction of water flow based on that. So basically perpendicular to each of the contour lines. And you can also see where the disposal beds will be treated effluent disposal beds are in relation to that. So that water is all being focused in on Snug Harbor. This confirms that nicely. And you can also see that if you do, which we did back again in early, mid-2005-ish, 6, do a flyover with the thermal imaging camera in like August at low tide. And where there's groundwater emerging at the shore, you see a darker color. Right? Warmer water is lighter. And so right here in the Snug Harbor area, these little red dots again are our groundwater sampling wells. We have 2 wells, and well 19, which is a town well, is actually located sort of in between them. There's a lot of groundwater flow there. Here's what the data look like from our wells. So we've sampled these. We continue.
Hold on.
He's pointing at his thing.
Like
but we-
on there, what you're talking about?
Yeah, I could.
Use
but
your
I don't
mouse.
have a pointer.
Yeah, you have
Use
to use
the
the
mouse.
mouse, Ken.
You can use the mouse.
I know he could tell where now.
Uh-oh, what did I do?
So it's at the bottom there.
You're the first one.
I should come in next time with one of the long sticks with a little red rubber pointer on the end.
A little laser,
It is.
Remember that?
like Sister Mary had.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, can you guys?
Go back one.
where did it go?
They wanted
There
to
it
go
is.
back one slide.
Go back one slide. All right, I'm talking about right here, Snug Harbor, this area, okay?
Now we can see it.
Can you see it?
And the point where those pink lines were, that's like converging right between those 2 red dots, correct?
Correct, that's right in here again, right there. Okay, so those 2 red dots are this, and here's well 19, which is a town well. Okay? And then if we look at what is the concentration of nitrogen in these wells, which we've been measuring, we continue to measure, but this is data between 2006 and 2017. We have about 340 data points measured over multiple dates. You can clearly see, let's see if there it is. Here's well SC3, this yellow highlighted well right there. That's really the core of this plume that's emanating from the wastewater plant and the disposal of that treated effluent there. Another way to look at it actually is to look at vertical structure of the well. So if we look at the vertical structure of nitrogen concentrations shown here on the x-axis versus depth, these wells that are representing local sources have high nitrate closer to the surface. But once you get into deeper water, down about this is about 20 to 25 feet, you have low concentrations, comparatively low. That's not true for that SC3 location right in the upper north corner of Snug Harbor. So that's, again, evidence that the water is emanating from far away, forming a deep plume. And we can take all that data, contour it, and what we've shown here is kind of a stretched out version of the shoreline. Here's Snug Harbor. Here's that SC3 location. Here's Massapequa Creek. And again, the darker reddish orange colors represent higher concentrations, as high as 300 micromolar, which is, 70 into 300?
4 point something.
4 point something milligrams per liter, okay? So we know where we need to treat this plume. We know where the problem is, and we can even convert that into an estimate of where the loading comes from in West Falmouth Harbor, and you can see that more than half the load is entering in the Snug Harbor and portion of the harbor. Now, here's the pattern over time for the treatment plant. Flows in blue, but in red, we have the concentration of nitrogen in the treated effluent. And back in 2005, we made a major improvement to the treatment with the installation of the sequencing batch reactors. And this clearly shows that. There's a few spikes that sometimes occur, I think, you can tell me why. But, you know, much reduced concentrations. The plant started in 1987. We did not see the beginnings of an increase in the harbor until 1998, 99. This is well 19 data, town well 19 data from the harbor. And it ramped up over a period of years as the plume reached the harbor. So we know it took at least 12 years for this contaminated wastewater that was disposed of at the wastewater plant to reach the harbor. And since the reduction in concentration, we're only beginning, I think this data would suggest, in 2018 or so, to see a reduction in the concentrations that are reaching the harbor. So there's a lot of lags built into this. And at the rate we're going, it's going to be a number of years before we see return to baseline. And so that's the justification for saying, let's install something to intercept this plume and try to remove it. So, oops, there. So, permeable reactive barriers, that's the strategy that we could use. The basic idea is, the reason there's so much nitrate in the groundwater is that the groundwater is very oxic. There's not enough carbon to create anaerobic conditions. If there were anaerobic conditions, microbes would grow that would remove this nitrate, convert it to N2 gas. But we can create those conditions if we add a reactive carbon source. And so the two strategies that have been used have been to put in some kind of a wood chip barrier, which of course supplies a decomposable substrate, or to inject emulsified vegetable oil. So the beauty of this is that it captures all sources of groundwater, nitrates in the groundwater. It doesn't matter whether they're coming from local septic systems, lawn fertilizers, rainfall. When placed near the shore, where the travel time is short to get to the estuary, they're going to become active almost immediately. There's no debates about whether we're taking water from Little Pond and moving it to West Falmouth. It's treating at the source. And it's passive. Put it in, it works. Until that carbon substrate is used up. So we've actually done some experimentation to show the effectiveness of this. The Water Quality Management Committee, with the help of Matt Charette and people at the Oceanographic, did an experiment with EVO, emulsified vegetable oil injection at Shorewood Drive. And so on the left side, yeah, you can see sort of what that looks like. They advance basically an injection well. They can insert this rod into the sediment, push in the oil, and then pull it out, cap the little hole. And on the right side is an approach to get wood chips to depth using an auger to create basically a 12-inch borehole and then auger in the wood to depth. I keep doing that. Escape.
On the far left side.
So we tested this initially in McQuaid, so I'll just, because I was responsible for doing this, toot the horn a little. In 2005, we installed this barrier, shallow barrier in McQuaid, 20 meters or so long, and we sampled in a number of ways. We had test wells. You could just walk along the shore and collect water seeping out in the intertidal zone. And some of that data from the intertidal zone sampling is shown here. So if we just look at the bottom graph here, you've got distance along the shore, and on the left side of that graph is where there is no barrier, so that's an adjacent control area, if you will. And the concentrations here are ranging from about 0.1 milligram per liter up to maybe 3 or 4 milligrams per liter. If you go to where the barrier was, the concentrations were under 1/10 of a milligram per liter. They were almost, there was really no detectable nitrate. Worked very well. The same was true at the Childs River site. And we've continued to monitor these, and we've even dug up some of these wood chips and seen how effective they are. But when you walked out there 4 years after we put the barrier in, this is what you saw at low tide, where there was groundwater that had not moved through the barrier. We had some algal growth in the seepage zone, and where we had the barrier, there was no algal growth because there were no nutrients emerging. So it was very effective. We've, as I said, tested now that wood has been in the ground for 14 years. So this is an experiment we did where we took some of that wood up to the Wareham wastewater plant, pumped wastewater effluent through it, and compared it to fresh wood in bioreactors. The red line represents the fresh wood. The blue line represents the old wood. Nitrate concentrations shown on the vertical axis, and time in the reactor is shown on the horizontal axis. And they're both able to remove virtually all the nitrate within 12 hours under warm conditions. Little less effective under cool conditions. So it's long-lived. Results from the Shorewood EVO experiment are shown here. And so, again, we have nitrate concentrations, here shown in milligrams per liter in the vertical axis, and dates going from when June of 2020. Now, was that before any injections, or was that just after?
That was just before.
Just before. So here you could see the concentrations of nitrate in a control area where there were no injections, and 15 feet down gradient from where the injections were going to occur, and 50 feet down gradient. So orange is 15 feet down gradient, gray is 50 feet down gradient. The injections were done, and almost immediately, 15 feet down gradient, all of that nitrate disappeared. Control, you can continue to see it bouncing around with high nitrate concentrations. This was supposed to be a 2-year dose. It's 4 years later, and we're still not seeing any nitrate 15 feet or even 50 feet down gradient. So, again, this approach works really nicely. So here's what we're proposing. This is the last slide. To focus you in again on that Snug Harbor area. With the funding that we have, we think we can put in 2 approximately 125-foot PRBs. DEP does not want you to use EVO closer than 100 feet to an open water body. So that's why we're proposing to use the EVO on the northern portion of this sort of line of shoreline where we have enough distance to do it, and then try to use the wood chip boreholes where we don't have that much clearance to shore. And this should capture, based on the data we have, a good piece of that plume coming from the harbor. So with that, I'm open to questions.
So, whoa. We always, the board always asks questions first, then we go to the audience, all right? So, Steve?
You knew I had questions.
You had your hand up.
Oh.
Or
No,
are you
you're right,
praying?
you're right. Both. This is great, and it's a no-brainer, right? It's free and it works.
Well, hopefully it's free.
But pretend for a minute it wasn't free, if it was town money. If you go to one of your slides toward the end of the graph of the results from your experiments in Wacoit Bay, go back a little faster, there, that one. The input is of, as you said, I think, 3 or 4 milligrams nitrogen per liter. And-
Yeah,
and
well, in
that-
Childs River, actually, it was up around 8.
Okay,
milligrams.
but that's from a residential neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
It's not from a sewage plant.
That's right.
Then go further, earlier in your talk, to that orange and yellow plot of the ground concentrations near the shore from, keep going, there. The peak concentration in the ground, I think you said, is 2 or 3.
Well, let's see, I think we said 4-ish.
Or
Okay,
something.
so it's about the same. And that's from a sewage treatment plant.
Yeah, but it's located far away, yes.
Right. But it's not like there's a big monster there that's different than run-of-the-mill, plain vanilla residential neighborhoods as far as nitrogen concentration.
Well, it depends how, in the densely settled peninsulas, along Vineyard Sound, you're right.
But
In
I'm
other
right
words, Little
here.
Pond, Great Pond, Green Pond, those places all have high nitrate concentrations.
Yep, no, I'm talking about this location, this project.
Yeah,
That graph is what you're treating. And it's the same as what you're treating in your experiment at Wacoit Bay, approximately. So would it be economical compared to sewers and IAs in your diversion if you actually had to pay for all of those 3 in the same kind of milieu? Would it be cost effective?
well,
Again, I'm not against it because
no,
it's
no, but I'm
somebody
trying to
else's
figure out
money.
what your question is.
I'm gonna jump in here a little bit. The next thing that's on the agenda is going to be introducing the cost of dollars per kilogram of nitrogen removed. So what I think you're asking is, I'm gonna try to rephrase it, what's the cost per
Yes,
kilogram
yeah,
of
thank you.
nitrogen
No,
removed?
that's an excellent
And I don't know that Ken has traveled down that path, but it's a reasonable question to, as we keep working with this, to stay focused.
I think where we have a concentrated plume like this, it is cost effective, yes, because, but this is not, I mean, how many homes are contributing to that plume from the wastewater plant?
How many times can you
There's
get lucky?
thousands of homes.
How many times can you get lucky with that convergence of groundwater
Right,
to a point?
right.
It's an opportunity
Right.
because of the way everything's going on. And from my perspective, when they put this all in, it does have a finite life, whether you're using the vegetable oil or the wood chips. But Ken started off by talking that groundwater's moving, I don't know what he said, but groundwater moves about a foot a day. And it takes all these years from time A to time B. If you look at putting this in, and the expected life of the system once it goes in, at the point where somebody would have to say, oh, we've got to replenish this system, that plume will have moved by, it'll be gone.
Well, that's the hope. At that point, we will have used the outfall long enough that there will no longer be any inputs from wastewater plants. So we will have solved the immediate problem for the next 10 or 15 years, whatever it is, 20 years, and hopefully improve the harbor and for,
Ed wants to straighten you out.
Impossible mission, but I'll try. Just to put it in some perspective, because Ken gave a great science lecture here that if you haven't been following along with this stuff for some years, you might say, what the hell is he talking about? The science works. The numbers show at Snug Harbor, it's a mess. There is a concentrated plume creating a hot spot that you can visually see at low tide seeping out of the bank. And it's got a lot of nitrogen and it's a lot of volume. So concentration of as high as 3 to 4 parts per million is half really to what Steve Layton was saying, that they were seeing at Childs River. That was more in the 8 range. So this is more dilute but larger volume. So the pounds of nitrogen entering into the watershed is very significant.
That's what's reflected in this loading curve, okay?
Yes.
So you can see,
Now, that's pounds, that's tonnage, that's mass of nitrogen.
that's basically saying, 4,000, 5,000 kilograms per year, that's 10,000 pounds.
So-
Concentration times volume.
Coming from that plume.
Simplistically stated, Snug Harbor's a mess. And we feel the main culprit is this legacy plume coming from years and years of pumping all that water and treating it now to a very, very high level of purity, 3 parts per million on the average, but it's gonna take 10, 20 years for that to reach the harbor. And once the outfall is in place, it's gonna take another 10 to 20 years for everything to flush through. The idea was, what can we do as a community in the meantime to try and stop the degradation of Snug Harbor? This is it. We have an opportunity to get just under $500,000, maybe, hopefully, of federal funds to try this. It's going to prove the technology even further than it already has been, and it'll help to alleviate a problem that was created from the wastewater treatment plant.
But in terms
Now-
of the cost effectiveness, if it costs $30,000 or $40,000 to sewer one whole house, right? This is $400,000. So what are we talking about?
10 houses.
10 houses?
You can divide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment?
Yes, a couple quick things. Amy, maybe you know, have they modeled the decreased groundwater flow rate when the outfall's in operation?
Decreasing groundwater flow rate.
Right, in other words, right now, we're overloading, artificially loading the groundwater dome under the treatment plant, right? How many hundreds of thousands of gallons? And so that's gonna disappear. So you're gonna be, I don't wanna call it trickle
You're saying
charging,
slowing
but you're
things
gonna be
down.
reducing the hydraulic pressure on the groundwater there. So it's gonna disappear even more slowly
Yes.
than what we're projecting right now.
Yes, they've not gone through and modeled all of that, but we have looked at
Yeah.
when the stop using the beds.
Right.
What's the change in the groundwater elevation in that area when the beds are changed?
Right.
And so the hydraulic driver will be lowered, the
Yep.
time of travel will increase.
Will increase.
If you just express it as a percentage, in other words, there was a groundwater flow before the sewage treatment plant was ever built.
Yeah, we could.
Somebody like John
Yeah, no,
knows
we
what
could-
that is.
We could figure this out. I'm saying,
Yeah.
the question is, have we done it? We've not done it, but
Right.
we do know that the height of the groundwater will change once we stop discharging at those beds.
Yeah.
So that
I'm
changes the
just saying, it
driver.
doesn't need a lot of measurements. It's in the literature. Somebody like John knows what the flow was.
Johnny's just volunteered you to figure this out, no.
There's a model that just determined
Yeah.
that. USGS built those
Yeah.
hydraulic models,
And
so.
surely Amy knows what she's pouring in the ground now.
Yeah, we do,
You have an assumed
Doesn't-
hydraulic
We do.
conductivity in your head.
we do. All right, Jonathan. John,
It was a great presentation. I really liked it. One question I've always had is, have we thought about putting a PRB directly below the sand beds that we're discharging
We
all this
talked about
material?
that,
You could put wood chips or even EVO at the, because there's about 50, 60 feet of vadozone before you hit the water table there.
So I
So you
think-
have chance for things to oxygenate, convert to nitrate, and then get it close to the source so it doesn't disperse out away, because flow lines, in this case, it's very nice, but other places, the flow lines are gonna be more complicated.
Well, Hoyfelder built the layer cake system of septic system. It's exactly the same idea, the nitro-E. There's lots of these approaches using wood as the matrix to encourage denitrification, both in alternative on-sites and I think what we're starting to come to the conclusion is where you have a site characteristic like this is the place to put these, right? Where you know you have a high concentration of plume, significant groundwater flow, they're gonna work. The problem with putting it right below the sand beds, in my opinion, without any doing recycling, the wastewater plant's done a great job. It's removed all the nitrogen. The nitrogen that's being released is probably the more refractory organic nitrogen that was not
Can't get both.
readily attacked in the treatment process. Now, between the time, it sinks through that 100 feet of Vado zone and moves into the aquifer a couple kilometers to get to the shore, some of that is degraded, and that's why we have the nitrate there. That's my,
I'm sorry.
No.
Wait a minute.
Steve.
I was supposed, Steve's managing this, not me.
oh. Steve, am I allowed to recognize Amy?
No, may I speak for a moment?
Yeah,
I, ju-
sure.
I wanted, it might not be as clear as I would like it to be, that what you're trying to address is the legacy plume from the original treatment facility. And the new treatment facility that's been operating since 2005 is not causing the same problem. It is still contributing a low concentration of nitrogen. So that's an important distinction. The other thing is there was a comparison being made about, cost and removal. Your cost per kilogram is an important thing to talk about, because in each of those examples, the PRB does a great job exactly down gradient of removing in that aquifer flow line, does a great job of removing the nitrogen. The question is, how much of the aquifer is it capturing?
How much of the flow?
Yeah, how much of the flow is it capturing?
Right. So in the case of Shorewood Drive, for example, I think and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, the original thought was you would have 20 or 30 homes that would be
Keep going.
accepted.
Keep going. These are general numbers, but go ahead. And then what happened?
Flow didn't go quite the way we thought. There was
Correct.
less flow than we thought, blah, 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 and it's like 7 homes, right?
Right.
So, that's the critical piece of this, is knowing that the siting is appropriate.
All right, there were some hands in the audience. I think Malcolm put his hand up first and tried to speak, so we'll let him go first.
Yeah,
Microphone.
Which is why I spent so much time on the siting.
Ken, you showed a slide with 3 barrels on it. Is that, is the barrel, the round barrel, is that?
Yeah.
No, there were brown,
Oh, wood chips?
no, there was,
Oh, let's go back to it.
yeah, okay.
If I can figure out.
Where it had the
I think we're
EVO.
going this way. Yeah.
No,
Talking about
no,
this?
No, next one, where you were showing the EVO barrier, the next one, next one, next one, next one. Oh, yeah, right here. So.
Oh, those aren't barrels, those are well locations.
Okay, so how many of these wells are you putting in and filling them with wood chips? What's the distance?
Oh.
Those are monitoring wells.
So if you look at the little red, let's look at the blue line, okay, the little blue line there?
Yeah,
I think the thinking was to put them about 5 feet apart.
The estimate is 64 boreholes in that 125 feet.
64 boreholes, 12 inches each in diameter, to 30 feet, 35 feet, something like that.
In the sawtooth pattern, so
Yeah.
the 2 rows.
In a offset, right?
uh-huh,
One
yeah,
here, one
yeah.
there.
So the water can't flow in between them then, right?
Well, the water can flow between them, but it's not like a solid trench. That's been one of the issues with using wood, is that it's extremely costly to dig a trench 30 feet deep next to the shore. You have to de-water everything and so forth. So this is a little bit of a compromise. But the wood does leach a lot of dissolved organic carbon, and that kind of, much like the EVO, moves, down gradient, and at least for a while coats
Right.
all of the sediments, so.
Yeah, Malcolm, that's actually was a good question. Does the water go in between it? because part of what we're setting this up to do is to measure one way where we're putting the vegetable oil in, which we know permeates the soil, and the other one, on a cost basis, we're trying out putting in a series of these things spaced a certain way and comparing the effectiveness. If not all the water goes through the wood chips, the water that goes through the wood chips, it'll get reduced. Question is, where is the effectiveness of that? And then back to, should we have spent 3 times as much money digging a big, long trench and filling it with wood chips, or are we getting pretty good reduction at these 12-inch diameter boreholes?
There's another aspect to this, which is that the wood used is basically chunks of wood. It's coarse. And that encourages water flow. So the thought is that they would present a more permeable type of sediment that you might get actually more flow, at least vertically, in those systems, which would help treat a greater volume of water than you would expect just going through in a plant. Yep.
Okay, go ahead, jump to the mic. And I'm going to try to wrap this up because we have one more sort of meaty presentation today.
Yeah, no worries. Ken, great presentation. It really gives me a lot of hope for some of these high nitrogen areas in our town. Can you go back to the original graph that showed the flow?
Oops, which way am I going there?
With the pink lines on.
Pink lines, way back at the beginning.
Yeah, way back at the beginning.
That's it. Yeah.
So you're saying the direction of groundwater flow is going from the top corner over there where it says contours diagonally down to where it says 3.8?
Approximately, yes.
So not shown on this picture are discharge beds 14 and 15.
No, they're not shown.
Yeah. So would you say that those beds, the flow goes the same direction? It seems like everything in this area is following the same.
It does not.
They're way far away.
Well, they're, well,
I think that engineers have done some studies that show
Yeah.
that it does not enter into the West Falmouth.
Matt, we can get you a picture of the particle tracking for those other beds. The particle tracking shows where the groundwater flow is going. It's not going to West Falmouth.
I'm very familiar with the particle tracking, and the particle tracking shows the groundwater discharge going into the Mashaputcra Creek area, and the wetlands from Mashaputcra Creek extends all the way to the Katoza Farm, right next to Hayland Stables.
Yep.
So if the discharge goes anywhere close to that, it's gonna go right into Snug Harbor. I've been trying to say this for a while. This graph right here perfectly shows that the discharge, the groundwater flow in this area goes southwest. It doesn't go
One
west.
more slide. Because, I'm not sure you realize
There's
how,
the, there's
what a
the beds
blow
right
up.
there. Those are beds 14 and 15 in the top corner.
Are you suggesting?
under table.
Are you suggesting that the permeable reactive barrier is not in a proper location?
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that this modified discharge permit isn't gonna fly
Which
if
modified-
the
which-
discharge
which
from
modified-
beds,
Which modified discharge permit?
the one that we're currently applying for.
We are not applying for a modified discharge permit.
You've pulled your discharge permit?
We are not applying for a modified discharge permit.
You're not applying for extra discharge at beds 14 and 15?
We're not applying for any increase in the flow at the treatment plant.
Oh, so you're using the additional flow, but the Mass DEP still,
We have no modified discharge permit application before the DEP right now.
you have a permit.
The plant is permitted for a specific flow. Yes.
But Matt, these contour lines, none of these wells are in an area where they can address what you're talking about. I mean, you can see though, they are straightening out, right? And, we don't have the well density. Let's see, if we go back, Amy, there are other wells, right?
Yes,
There are, and it's on the watershed, it's
Not-
north of the
not on
watershed
this.
boundary.
Yes.
That's all right. Thank you,
14
Ken.
and 15.
Great
So that should
presentation.
tell you right
Right,
there.
and
Very
a lot
hopeful
of,
about it.
Okay, right?
right, and a lot of very sophisticated people
All
at
right.
DEP have already looked at it.
All
so
right,
it doesn't
I-
go there.
I'm gonna acknowledge you and everything, but I'm getting concerned because we have a fairly meaty presentation, so
How do I get rid of this thing?
I wasn't gonna speak, but then after I just heard that conversation, I had the minutes from the meeting, and I think Mr. Hanley is correct in assuming that there's an increase, because it says here in your minutes, Lowell, Ms. Lowell provided an update on the groundwater discharge permit and modification application.
No.
She reviewed the process to get to the application stage, which included coordination with the Department of Environmental Protection in conducting a hydrological evaluation on the results of additional loading
correct.
to existing beds,
Correct.
14 and 15.
All right.
Okay, so I think
No,
that's maybe,
I
I don't know, I'm just.
I was
reading
brief.
minutes.
Let me try to elaborate just a little bit. At one point in time, as we were looking at extending the sewer area, we went down a path that we would add an additional limit on our permit. As that process unfolded, and so what you're reading is where we were at a point a month ago or so, or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, okay? A while back.
No, these are minutes of
Just-
January 22nd, okay.
Okay, it's a while back. The plant is currently permitted for a certain flow. The actual flow that goes to the treatment plant is substantially lower than the permitted flow, because during design and development, people are always very conservative, and they look at it a certain way. There's a requirement that if you get to 80% of your permitted flow, you have to develop a plan and present it to the DEP for what you're gonna do so that you don't go over that flow. We have very limited places in town right now where we're going to have any additional sewering beyond the area we're looking at. So we took a step back and revisited all of the numbers and realized that if we take the additional flow we anticipate from the sewer project we're going to town meeting for, and add it to the existing flows that we're seeing, that number is below the permitted flow. So there was no need to go ask for additional capacity at this time. As those homes get hooked up, at some point, we will trip over that 80% boundary. We will know much better at that point whether we have an outfall in progress or not, or whether we've got to go find more beds someplace in town, wherever that might be. So there's a lot of things, a lot of paperwork, a lot of other things to chase, but there was time and effort to try to change the discharge limit. That was just an exercise. That we were not going to reach that number. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense, but that's why there was confusion.
I understand,
because
I understand. And I didn't mean to be curt with him, but it's just, when he was saying we are no longer, the town's put a letter out saying we withdraw our application, and here's all the backup, here's how all the numbers add up, and here's what this means in terms of, at some point several years from now, if somebody wants to do a certain development downtown with additional flow in it, and we look at how those numbers all add up, we might have to say, no can do till the outfall's in.
Right, and I know that you've given variances for flow control in the past for projects that were not supposed to be sewered, or weren't gonna be sewered, and they took up capacity.
Yeah, the town could, the issue became we could have decided to go back to town meeting for a lot more money, to do an awful lot of additional studies, evaluate a lot of wetlands, evaluate all sorts of things, to add capacity to the existing discharge permit that we don't need. So we would have spent money for something we don't need to do.
Like that, not just spend more money.
All right, step up to the microphone.
Sorry, mine is quick.
No, it's okay.
Tammy Gilbert with West Falmouth. What do you think the probability is of you getting that grant, getting the funding?
I don't know.
Over 50%.
And what's the process that you need to go through to do that?
Well, now we have to complete the full proposal. So the full proposal, these proposals have very specific sections. You're supposed to supply them with
Okay,
more information on.
okay, and that's something that this committee would do?
It's something that our, Kristen, I, and.
They're working on it diligently right now.
Okay.
Tech are working on.
Okay. Okay, and so when do you think you can get the PRB in at Stone Harbor? Like, I mean,
Well, if we get the money, I think it could happen pretty quickly.
Well, the
I'll try
projected
to-
timeline,
No,
3 years, or are we talking
less than that.
6
let's
months?
do-
the
let's-
projected timeline would be spring of 2026, because we would be notified in May if we get the funding, and we can't drill in the winter because the ground is frozen.
Yeah, and they probably
Spring
need
of
to
2026.
There's
get
a
some
lot of permitting hurdles.
permits, you know, all that stuff.
Okay, and is this
So hopefully you
presentation
guys will
available?
show up in favor.
And is this presentation available online?
I
It will
can-
be.
I can send it.
We make them all available, yeah.
Thank you.
So is the proposal submitted to Elon Musk?
Hello?
Yes, we're hoping he'll fund it.
All right, all right. Thank you, everybody. This is we applied for a grant on the National Estuaries. We got through the first screening, probably a third of them maybe go forward, maybe less than that. So we're structured in a way that this is a piece of information they'd like to get.
Actual.
We just, I have a high level of confidence that this is not wasted effort, that it's gonna go someplace. We'll see where it goes.
We do need matching funds,
Contributions gratefully accepted.
yeah?
Put the little cans in West Falmouth
And-
Market.
Yeah, or,
You beat me to it. I was gonna say, well, put a kid in West Falmouth Market.
Bake sales, however you want to get
listen.
it, but,
Okay. So I'm going to set the stage here for where we're going next. Many of you have sat through, over the last period of time, the fact that we've looked at individual watersheds. And in individual watersheds, what it means for areas that are already designated for sewers. And what it would mean if we only sewer the areas that are designated for sewers, and then had to make up the remainder by putting innovative, advanced treatment, IA systems in. I always forget the word, but that falls out of the watershed permit, says you have to have a plan if you're trying other things.
Contingency.
The contingency.
What was it called?
The traditional, it's the
Yeah, but there was-
traditional
there was a name for
contingency.
that. What was it?
Contingency plan.
The contingency. So basically, watershed by watershed, we developed the contingency plan, which would be the maximum number of IAs that have to go in, based upon the sewers that we've got now. We're inside a framework where we know enough about where the outfalls go, and we know enough about the capacity at the receiving point in Vineyard, in Nantucket or Vineyard Sound, whichever one you want me to call it, Tom.
I can address that in a few minutes, report.
But we've begun an active process that we've not yet walked forward in front of the select board or anybody else to pick out what we believe is the amount of flow we want to put into the outfall. Okay, right now, it's a little bit ambiguous, the area that's shown on maps to be sewered, plus the area sewered at up to 1.5 or 1.7 MGD, but we're working out what does it cost per kilogram of nitrogen reduced, and should we redefine the sewer area as our next step? And so we've developed a methodology to evaluate on a watershed by watershed basis if additional sewering is cost effective relative to the number of IAs that have to go in. And we're working towards getting this together in such a way we bring it to the Board of Selectmen as a suggestion on what we should go for the MEPA process to permit the outfall for. We're working on the MEPA submittal for the outfall, and at some point before the summer, we expect to have that ready to go in to get started with that process, and we need to put a number in there. The question is, what's that number? Is it 1.5, 1.7, 2, 2.5, 3, or some number above 3? So we're trying to work to that. We're trying to work to that in a logical, methodical way. And I now turn it over to you to try to walk us through that logical, methodical way.
Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. So Steve basically said all of these summary points. What we're trying to do with this exercise is basically, first and foremost, estimate nitrogen reduction potentials in the same manner that we did those geoboundaries. So for the geoboundaries, if you recall, we were using the average water flows either from the MEP model or from the Cape Cod Commission database, depending which was going to provide a more conservative nitrogen reduction number.
I know what it is.
The difference between looking at this from an IA perspective versus sewer is that IAs using the DEP standard of 10 milligrams per liter effluent. Sewer would be 0 milligrams per liter, and that's assuming that discharge is outside of the watershed. The next point for this is, as Steve was saying, calculate a conservative estimate for discharge flow. This is what's going to be used to guide infrastructure sizing. And part of what the conservative estimate is including allowances for growth potential, as well as, depending on the type of sewer that's put in, if it's gravity, having an allowance for your infiltration and inflow. So getting the most conservative number, which would be your highest possible flow rate, to help guide those infrastructure sizings. We're also looking at providing preliminary cost estimates to determine the cost benefit between certain areas where you could put IAs or where you could potentially put sewers. For this, we are using the current present collection system estimate that GHD is working on for the Great Pond Phase 1. So the components included in that are basically what Amy talked about in her last presentation. The components that have historically been included in the betterment process. So we're looking at the big lump sum that's coming at a homeowner for an IA and for what would be essentially included in the betterment. So those are the two numbers that are being compared for the cost benefit. Not the O&M, not the design, not monitoring, or anything beyond just that initial installation. So initially, we're looking at the areas that have been identified in the CWMP, and then beyond that, areas where sewer expansion makes economic sense. But that is completely dependent on discharge capacity. So what was always planned in the CWMP, what has always been talked about, is the Great Pond area was always planned, and there was a plan for discharge. These pinkish salmon-colored, those were projected sewer areas based on their density, based on the needs. That was what was identified in the CWMP. So these areas with the land-based discharge evaluations that have been done, there's plans where this discharge could go. There's ranges for flow on all of these. Again, there's different contingency factors in there. So the higher number is what we would be using for the most conservative of what's the maximum that the town could anticipate. So for this comparison, using the exact same assumptions from the geoboundary exercise, whether we believe them or not, the effluent coming from a home is 35 milligrams per liter. The assumption that Title V reduces 25% of that effluent. So going through and using the average water use for a single-family home, looking at Wacoit Bay for this example, in the MEP it was 135 gallons per day. So for an average single-family home in Wacoit Bay, if you install an IA at 10 milligrams per liter, each home would reduce 2.7 kilograms of nitrogen. If you install sewer at 0 milligrams per liter, so outside of watershed disposal, would be 4.4 kilograms per home. That's just for single-family homes. For everything that's not a single-family home, using the individual parcel water use that's in the Cape Cod Commission database to assign a nitrogen reduction number there.
Chris, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Isn't the phrase Wacoit Bay irrelevant there? Aren't these generic numbers that apply to any household?
Because the average, so this average water use is different for every estuary in the MEP.
The people around Wacoit Bay use a different amount of water than the people around other.
Based upon the data.
Okay.
So, here are the generalized cost comparison with their assumptions. So again, an IA performing at 10 milligrams per liter, average for a single-family home would be $40,000, and that's for your hardware and your installation. That does not include design, O&M, monitoring, or landscaping.
Yeah, and if I can, that's the presumption that there's an existing Title V system there. If somebody's got a
So it's
cesspool.
just retrofitting.
if somebody's got a cesspool.
Right.
Which is not, I always want to cover this. Cesspools are no longer allowed in Falmouth. If somebody has a cesspool, they've got to put in a Title V system plus this.
Correct.
Yeah. But they'd have to do that anyway, so.
Yeah, I just
You
want
serve
to,
like-
I just.
Right, no,
I
I'm
just-
putting,
We're making
trying to
all
put it in
the points.
perspective.
Yeah, and part of this is because people come out and they say, they're one of these things, people have had very large ranges of these. And some of the higher end costs are systems where they're not Title V compliant, and they gotta put a whole Title V system in, so. The 40,000 number is the best guess.
So, looking at for an IA, a 20-year life expectancy. So people keep throwing around 15 to 20 years for an IA. However, at the 20-year mark, you're not going to be installing a whole new tank. There's going to be some components that need replacing. For something like a nitro, it's going to be wood chips. So there is cost beyond that. For sewer, performing at 0 milligrams per liter, again, out of watershed disposal. The cost estimate from GHD for the collection system alone, again, those components that have previously been included in the betterment, is $670 per linear foot of pipe. Again, on a 20-year life expectancy. If you're using low-pressure system, your grinder pump potentially needs to be replaced. But again, it's not the $40,000 betterment that's going to be coming back at the 20-year mark. So from GHD for their estimate, that includes the construction cost. Again, this is specific to the Great Pond Phase 1 currently. The gravity collection system, the low pressure system, the lift stations, and the force main between those lift stations, the allowance for grinder pump. So that is what GHD has included. It does not include the cost to connect from the house to the road. So, Antler Shores was one of those salmon-colored areas over in Waquoit Bay. So looking at the highlighted parcels just on that whole peninsula, there's about 250. 231 of them are developed and 223 are single-family residents. So the roads, all of the red lines of where the collection system would theoretically go, is about 17,000 linear feet. Using the average water flow and again, allowing for contingencies of growth and I&I, would be about 35,000 gallons per day. So if you look at that for the two different scenarios, so each of those developed parcels, $40,000 for 231 parcels would be $9.2 million. If you look at it for sewering, for the 17,000 linear feet, that covers 231 parcels, $11.4 million. So looking at just cost per parcel, which doesn't include any potential subsidies, tax credits, loan forgiveness, nothing, just flat cost. You can see the sewering cost on a parcel basis is higher. However, if you're looking at the amount of nitrogen removed for the IAs, for $40,000 per parcel, you're getting 636 kilograms removed per year from that portion of the watershed. And that, I think the entire peninsula is part of the Eel Pond. With sewering, you're removing 1,036 kilograms. You remember, the reason that all of these projects are being considered is because there's a state mandate to reduce nitrogen to meet the TMDLs. So that's first and foremost the objective of these projects. So if you take that over the 20-year life expectancy, so if you're reducing 636 kilograms every year for 20 years, comes out to $724 per kilogram of nitrogen removed over those 20 years. Whereas the sewering comes out to $550 per kilogram. Seacoast shores, same thing. This is slightly more densely developed peninsula. Here we have just over 1,000 parcels, 950 of them are developed. 61,000 linear feet and almost 200,000 gallons per day of flow. Same thing, looking at those numbers, when it comes out, again, it's more densely developed, so more parcels. So now your cost per parcel is pretty equivalent. But when you're looking at the cost per kilogram removed, on Seacoast Shores, it's less than what it was on Antler Shores. Antler Shores was $550 per kilogram removed. So this is how we're using this exercise to say where the most cost-effective means and where the biggest bang for your buck for nitrogen reduction is for some of these areas. So as I said, the top takeaway from this is the comparisons between the nitrogen reductions towards achieving the TMDLs. That's why we're doing all of this. That's why all of this money is being considered, because we are under a state mandate to do that. So the next step is to identify the most cost-effective means to achieve that objective, both for the parcel owner and for the town. And then back to using this to provide conservative flow estimates. So this helps provide guidance for outflow capacity, for force main, lift station capacity, all of those considerations. So the next steps, evaluate other areas of town, plan for potential sewer expansions. Again, none of that can move forward unless there's discharge capacity. So we could say we're gonna sewer the whole town, and if the outfall doesn't come through, we're back to IAs everywhere. So without getting ahead of yourself and saying we're expanding sewer, the IA geo-boundaries is something tangible that can be implemented now. Sewering cannot because of the discharge. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay. Go- Just back up to either one of the tables yet. So what we've brought forward to you now is looking at two areas where we intend to sewer. This same methodology is gonna be used so that if we look above Route 28 right now, which is not in the sewer plan, when you start looking at the distance between the homes, the density of development, the cost per kilogram of nitrogen removed for 20 years, the further apart the buildings are, the more the sewer cost is gonna rise, right? The cost for the IA is not gonna move as much as you will. So there's a spot where it's going to be a push between whether you put IAs in or sewers in on a cost per kilogram removed. So that's how we're gonna use this tool to start looking at the extent to which sewers might go into a larger area than already, okay? I'm gonna go to John at the far end. I'm gonna circle the table.
So Kristen, I just want to make sure I understand the cost estimate for the sewer in dollars per linear foot. If I'm a homeowner and I have 60 feet of frontage, is that, I multiply that by 670 to get the cost to me as a homeowner, or that's just the total cost of
So
construction?
it's assigned by sewer equivalent unit. So typically, one sewer equivalent unit is a single-family home, where you have
Yeah.
apartments, commercial buildings, based on the water flow, that's where the select board is going to decide on what metric a sewer equivalent unit is. So
Right,
that
but if I'm a
project,
homeowner,
No, betterments are not on the frontage.
no, but I'm saying
Right.
that cost there, is
goes
that?
back to how it gets divided by how many.
One SCU.
By how many SCUs are in that project.
This doesn't have anything to do with SEUs.
Okay.
Sorry. I think Steve was gonna say it.
Yeah,
John's not gonna, no one's gonna pay based on their frontage.
no, it's okay.
That's just to calculate the total cost.
Well, that's what I'm
Then you
asking.
get the total cost and divide by the number of households and charge everybody the
So
same.
it has nothing to do with, so linear foot is the construction cost of the number
foot's-
of feet of
Yeah,
pipe.
yeah.
Okay.
That-
That's
this-
all I was asking. I want to make sure I
Okay.
understood that.
Yeah, so go to a picture of any one of the, so she's sitting there with the GIS system in front of her, and she's able to measure the distance on all these streets, okay? And if you went up above that, she can now go in and measure the distance up those streets and count up all the lots and single families and start working into what's it look like, okay? Tom?
No, I think it's a good job, and it's a great way to do it, and there's gonna be lots of decisions made farther down the line, as Steve says, when we're trying to figure out the balancing act between housing density, which is the big factor in terms of how much it's gonna cost per SEU to,
For the sewers.
Yeah, for the
Sewer
sewer.
cost is dependent upon the distance between homes.
yeah.
Steve?
As you went through these, I did in my head the proportion of the your bottom line, which in this case is the right-hand line. And the difference is of the order of 20 or 30% from the cheaper one to the more expensive one. And at the beginning, you were very honest and had a long list of all the costs that you did not include. And they didn't strike me as particularly difficult things to include. It's not like you had to do one for each house. And I think, I mean, it's not like these, when I said these are 20 or 30%, it's not like they're different by a factor of 2 or 10 or something in a scientific calculation where we can say, who cares about the 10 and 20%
So
differences?
when we started-
Obviously, this one's bigger.
Now, when we started this, Steve, when we started this, we had what I would call the tangential costs in there. You know, things that were like annual costs for this. But the more we looked at them, the more they weren't substantively different for a homeowner for IA or sewer, okay?
Yes, but then that makes the percentage difference smaller. If in addition to these costs, to make a silly point, if everybody had to pay $1 million extra as an IA fee and $1 million extra for a sewer, who cares about 752 versus 496? Now, I picked an absurd number to make the
did.
point. But even if it's $2, if you add it to both of them, it makes the percentage
I'm not
smaller.
disagreeing with you about the fact that they're not up there, and they would, we just felt that if we started putting up things here, talking about what's the average cost for wastewater, what's the average cost for pumping out the septic system every 4 years, what's the average cost, and putting all those in there, that instead of looking at what's going on with IAs and sewers, the relative cost benefit, that we would spend our time. We can put all that back in there and we can have a long conversation about all those numbers.
I think you should. I think you need to do it to calm down anybody who's been within 5 miles of a business school. I mean, those are real costs.
So do we take all those costs, because this is all a sort of a capital cost comparison right here? Do we then do present worth on all those other costs and roll them back in?
You pick something reasonable.
Well,
You're
what-
doing this, whatever you do, you're gonna do it the same for the IA and the same sewer, your discount rate and all that stuff. But at least you do it and you show people approximately what it is. I'll help you. I mean, those numbers, we have those numbers.
I heard him volunteering. So, yeah, so we'll get you to figure out the electricity cost for a grinder pump and what the wastewater fees are gonna be, and the frequency
Well,
of pump out.
and for
the
instance-
cost, what's the cost to put the wood chips in at 20 years? We need to figure that out too, right? And
I
then
don't
and
care
then-
if they're guesses.
and then-
Lumber's gonna be getting very expensive.
and then we need to back that up on a present worth basis, because we can't use a future value inside a chart that's all based upon current dollars, right?
Right?
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So Kristen, we're back to square one and a lot of work here.
Well, Ed's got
You've
something
got
to say, I
questions
think.
Yeah, Ed?
I think we're, that would get a little off the track at this point, because one of the first slides, the reason for the analysis is, well, how big an outfall we're gonna shoot for. And to get there, this is all part of it, and the more numbers you throw in there and the more variables, the more complex it gets. Go back to the flow and say, okay, with these numbers as our premise,
This is what we're trying to work on, yep.
what would make sense? Let's say, Antler Shores isn't a good example to use, because we're basically projecting, here's sewering that whole peninsula. But if we back up along, along Davisville Road, looking at the density and say, look, Seacoast Shores also, you had the whole peninsula would be sewered under this analysis. But we should look at then another peninsula where only part of it is planned to be sewered, like back up towards the
Over here.
west, there. Does it make sense to back into our geoboundary analysis for that area and said, to get to TMDL, we're only gonna sewer that much, and the rest of the peninsula is gonna be IAs, and it's gonna cost this. Supposing we extended that sewered projected area and doubled it, how many IAs would we then need, And is that cost offset? And should we allocate additional flow to the Davisville Peninsula?
You got it.
That's, I think, where we want to go with this exercise. And the final result is, how big an outfall are we trying to permit?
What's the flow? Yep.
I think that's where we want to go, and we can muddy the waters with a lot of numerical, financial analysis and subsidies and all this nonsense, which is very important. I'm not belittling that, but I think we want to keep the simpler exercise. Does it make sense to sewer more, and how many IAs would that reduce, and what's the cost-benefit analysis?
So go to any one of your final slides. So the IAs, every time, the estimated nitrogen reduction versus the sewer, I always refer to it as 2 to 1, but it's not quite 2 to 1. So that's the whole cost benefit, to figure out, how do you get to your TMDL? Okay, for the least overall capital cost, without determining who's getting 70% subsidies or other subsidies. This is just from a look point, and then that leads to a projection of what we should have for waste outfall capacity.
So
I think, Kristen, that we could, to Steve's concern, we could set up a separate table, to non-capital costs, annual.
The biggest one you left out is you did collection
annualized.
cost only for the sewer. What about the marginal cost of the outfall? If you did all IAs, just to be absurd, you wouldn't have to get any new leaching fields for the treatment plant, and you wouldn't have to build an outfall. To not include that seems crazy.
I'll disagree with the premise, because we still want to stop using the damn beds, because we're messing up West Falmouth. We want to get out of using the beds, and we know we're gonna have to sewer
You're right.
more.
There's some,
So there is a secondary reason, and to me, a very important one. Stop using the beds. We know we've created a monster.
fair enough, but there's still the marginal cost of a bigger plant and the outfall.
Yes.
So what these
Exactly.
costs are, would be costs to the parcel owner. The whole town will be paying for the outfall. This is what's coming directly back to people who have to upgrade their system either to IA or have to connect to sewer.
That's a separate political decision for the select board of how you divvy it up. What, at this level, it's what's the total cost of the town. How much of it you put on the homeowners and how much of it you put on the taxpayers is an independent choice.
So at some point, we're gonna have to upgrade the sewer plant capacity. Do you want us to estimate what the cost to upgrade the sewer? Sewer plant
Well,
capacity
at the
is?
very least, I want to see a little paragraph or footnote showing why you claim some of these things can be neglected. Maybe they're zero, but if they're not zero, they ought to be up there.
Okay,
And you only do them once. It's not like Kristen has to do it for each dot on the map. They're generic kind of numbers, just like the existing numbers are.
yeah, and one option is to say that we're not gonna do any more sewers beyond what we've already said in our plan, and just leave it at the thousands of IAs.
Well, why not look at that? I mean, I'm not claiming that makes sense, but if you were, unless you have ESP, I can't figure it out without looking at the numbers.
Steve, can I ask?
Just hold on, because I don't think Ken's got a shot at this yet.
Thank you. Well, a couple of things. One is that your GIS analysis looks like it only considers the direct frontage of the properties. What about the cost of getting the main back to the plant? Like, I mean, Seacoast Shores is further away. There's more miles
So,
sewer them than there
for
probably
this, if Seacoast Shores is its own project, the premise, the way everything has been laid out, is we're moving west to east. So you're already moving along, and you have those lines back to the plant, and you're connecting to Great Pond lift stations back.
Okay.
And you
So-
can't charge future projects past costs.
So the guesstimate is that the approximate amount of sewer main is equal for all.
That's the number, that's the most accurate number we have to work with to make these projections right now.
Okay, yep, so that explains that, and there's adequate capacity in those pipes, that hooking up is all you need to do.
That's the hope that it will be planned for that.
Okay. We were really clever, some of us.
It's Amy.
Yeah, I'm looking at it when I say that.
Very collaborative effort at this point.
Okay, so that was one question. The other question, and we've talked about this before with your geo-boundaries and stuff, is that in some of these places, it may not be possible to put IA on the property just because of, water table constraints or lot size constraints. So is that, it seems like you need to first cull out, you need to do sort of a two-stage analysis. One is how many lots can we actually put IAs on and versus the sewering.
Yeah,
Kristen already
Can-
did that in an
yeah,
early,
yeah, I
a
was
few
gonna
months
say-
ago.
So,
She did that in the geo-boundaries, right,
Yeah,
she has the
exactly.
data,
so
but I'm just saying if it,
we could go back and revisit that. The locations where we were concerned about the lot sizes are by and large areas we're already planning on sewering. And as we look at where sewers might get expanded, one of the factors might be to expand the sewers into areas where lot size is an issue, which should fall out by the density factor, whereas the more you move up to a place where the homes are spread further apart, the lots are not limited by putting in an IA system. We could try to cull out the 5 or 6% that might be a problem at some point, and then the question becomes, does this board want to wrestle with what those homeowners will do? Should we set up a nitrogen trading thing where somebody says, my lot's too small to put in an IA, but I'll pay $40,000 to the town to use as a subsidy to some other homeowner that wants to put an IA in, so that we get the same equivalent nitrogen credits? We could go down that path. That would be a good
well, I mean,
exercise.
it will be an issue for some percentage
Yeah.
of homes.
Yeah. But I don't know that we've drilled down that deep, other than the fact that we did an exercise of where the lots look small, but we're not saying that everyone that looks small can't fit an IA in it, okay?
Last,
All right.
the quickie.
Yeah.
So where are the non-traditional technologies that, like the Pleasant Bay watershed permit and that plan, they have a lot of storm runoff, fertilizer management, shellfish aquaculture, UD potentially. How will that get merged into this at some point that could reduce
Yep.
the number of
The
sewers or
watershed-
IAs?
The watershed plans will address fertilizer, aquaculture, stormwater.
So this is a maximum, that it could
There's
go
a-
lower.
There's a bigger picture still.
Yeah.
So we still have to determine what the updated loading is from the time of the MEP. So having those other alternatives that we know where there's potential, the shellfish and the runoff, that we're kind of keeping in our back pocket to help address the growth that has occurred since the time of the MEP. So we're trying to meet these numbers with the conventional approved solution right now.
In terms of stormwater, at some point, I should get you to go to the engineering department and see what they have for mapping on stormwater, okay? We have a lot of catch basins that leach into the ground, okay? They're not discharging directly, so there's some balance in there, okay? All right, I'm going to the audience. Hildy?
Just a quick question, Hilde Menge. So if there are more buildings in the future that are going to be sewered or we're going to have outflow, will that mean that the TMDL is going to change too? Because right now we're using all MEP report data, right? And so you say you might have to adjust. Does that also mean that the TMDL gets adjusted because we're going to put more nitrogen in?
The amount that you need to reduce to meet the TMDL. The TMDL is the physical amount of loading that's allowed to go in. So the amount of reduction that needs to happen, yes.
Has to be, okay, that's what I need to know.
But the TMDL will stay the same because that's been figured for a given watershed,
we need to get
a
down
given
there.
body of water, what it can handle in
Right.
terms of nitrogen loading.
Right. But to get there, we have to do more. Okay. It's amazing how much work we do to get rid of nitrogen that we need badly. I'm just
Yeah.
totally, every time I learn more, it's beyond me that we go the traditional route of keeping going the same way and the same way. It's-
Malcolm,
the
we
cost is-
got 4 minutes, and then the meeting ends.
Yes, you also need to include the cost of operating the sewer. Like, the wastewater treatment plant. So what is the operational cost for processing a gallon of
Okay.
wastewater?
All right, we'll add that in too.
And then, what is the expected maintenance and capital outlay? What's the condition of the plant now? And what is the expected necessary capital outlay for
You want us to add a
to main-
depreciation factor for the treatment plant?
No, I want you to say how much it's gonna cost down the road.
Yeah, that's depreciation.
Yeah.
That's
All right.
depreciation.
All right, or whatever.
If the plant has a 30-year useful life, you divide the cost of the plant by 30 years, and that's the amount of money every year you have to set aside to replace it. That's a straight depreciation table.
Yeah, unless the technology gets more expensive, but anyway, yeah, all right.
What factor do you think we should apply to technology getting more expensive in the future?
I don't know.
That's the problem.
Best guess.
My best guess is I take the value and divide it by 30.
Could get cheaper, it could be like
All right.
computer chips.
We've only got a couple of minutes here. I would,
Got wood chips and computer chips.
I would entertain a motion to skip item 5, reports of members and staff, to skip vote minutes
So
of
moved.
prior meeting.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Signify by saying aye. And I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay.